Welcome to Encountering Christ, a podcast about meeting Jesus in the ordinary moments of life, learning how to invite others into those encounters, and exploring practical ways to recognize Christ at work in our daily rhythms. Our prayer is that this time helps you see and share Christ more clearly. In our last episode, we looked at the second of four classic arguments for the existence of God. We looked at the teleological argument. Today, we're going to look at something a little more complex. We'll be looking at what is called the ontological argument. The ontological argument, which originates with Anselm, who died in the year 1109, begins with the idea of God, who is defined as a being greater than which nothing can be imagined. It then argues that the characteristic of the existence of God must belong to such a being, since it is greater to exist than not to exist. Now, I know that just that sentence is confusing to hear, it's confusing to understand just in the basic sentence. So let's break it down a little bit and see if we can't get it. First, let's understand what ontology is. Ontology is the study of the nature of being or existence. And this is where things start to get philosophical and perhaps uncomfortable for a lot of us. Dr. Ben Arbour explains it this way. And in this explanation, you can learn a little bit about where ontology is. He's talking about how we know something to be true. And a lot of times when we think we know something to be true, many times we will make assumptions that are not provable in the physical or mathematical world. For example, if you say that 2 plus 2 equals 4, and I ask you to prove that, you might bring out 2 apples and put them on the table and then lay next to those 2 more apples, and you would say, look, there are 4 apples. And that would be the same as saying the only things that are true are those things that can be proven scientifically. In other words, you're putting down the 2 apples, 2 plus 2 equals 4. The problem is that by bringing in the 4 apples, there are all kinds of presuppositions that you are using about the nature of numbers and where that comes from. I mean, what is 1? What is 2? Where does that concept come from? How do we know we can rely on that concept? You see, as humans, we rely on all sorts of concepts to be true that we have no idea where the basis of these concepts originates. And this is why the ontological argument is so confusing. It doesn't find its origin in mathematical or natural law types of concepts. It argues from underneath or before all of that. It argues from a position of the nature of being or existing. It speaks in the realm of that we exist as opposed to how we exist. And the problem for many of us, including myself, is that we don't think that way because we're conditioned not to. We've grown up in a world that presupposes what is as the only viable curriculum for defining who we are. Now, in order to understand the ontological argument for what it is, you have to let go of the desire to see it from a natural law standpoint. Rather, you must look at the question of God's existence from a being standpoint. To try and put it in simpler terms, as if that is possible, there was a guy named Feynman. He made this observation. He said, I can know things that I cannot understand. And that is quite a statement in the realm of an ontology, in the realm of being and existence. And it is in that statement that we have to ask the question, how is it possible that I can know things that I cannot understand? Let me say that again. How is it possible that I can know things that I cannot understand? Feynman famously highlighted the distinction between mere recognition and true comprehension whenever he said this. He said, what I cannot create, I do not understand. In other words, I can know a lot of things about a dog, but no matter how much I learn about the dog, I cannot create one from nothing. And what I cannot create, I do not fully understand. Which leads to a very important question. How do I even know anything? And what can I know? And it is in this space that Anselm makes his argument. What can I imagine? Well, I can imagine that there is a being which is the greatest possible being. And I could not imagine it if it were not true. I would not have the capability to imagine God if he were not there. For I cannot imagine something that doesn't exist. Now, I know what you may be thinking next. I can imagine a unicorn, but a unicorn doesn't exist. And that's where Anselm adds. He says, I could not imagine it if it were not true in all possible worlds. In other words, the only reason we could imagine a unicorn is because that is something that God could create. We can imagine it because God could do it. Simply put, the mere fact that we are capable of imagining God is the proof that God exists. That's a very simple way to put it. And that's a very simple look at a very complex proof of the existence of God. And it argues from a place that our culture does not like to rely on. Yet there it is. And the question perhaps you should think about today is this. How is it even possible that I can imagine God? And while you're at it, here is how you can grow in Christ today. Just spend the day imagining the vastness and glory of God. Now, he is way beyond what you or I could think or imagine, yet it is worth your time to try because he has given you the ability to do so. He has given you the ability to engage in imagining who he is. So take advantage of that. Today, do the ontological task and imagine God.